Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I am Mike Schaefer, joined by Michael Bruntz, Bruntz Christopherson, here on a Tuesday morning. Nebraska coming off a loss to Minnesota. Nebraska basketball coming off a win against Maine. Nebraska still doesn't have a full-time head coach, which isn't that unusual since it's still November. Lots to talk about, and that's why we are gathered here today. However, do we have any really important banter we want to get in here at this point in time? I mean, anything you want to get off your chest, anything you want to say, anything you want to let the people know?
I've got a question, but I'm going to save it for the basketball portion of the.
Okay.
The
we have
pod.
a basketball question that's not being used for banter. BC, do you have anything?
I don't know. Bruntz and I need to reenact something in the Michigan tunnel or have a little fun. I think with that, but that's all I got. I look forward to walking up and down the Michigan tunnel and being like, this is where all the boxing matches happen.
They haven't even gotten to the worst part of that tunnel, by the way, and it's when they bring the entire Michigan band up the tunnel as you're trying to do interviews.
Yeah,
it's there's a couple places in the conference where they do that, where you're like, everybody's kind of straining and leaning in to hear the coach, or the soft talking player or something like that, and you just got nothing. And then there's like a line of tubas just kind of marching through playing, whatever the Michigan fight song. So
it was pretty rough when John Papuchis was trying to explain that. Remember, they had just a special teams meltdown the one year. They lost 45-17. And Papuchis is trying to go into like what went wrong, and the Michigan band is like on their third verse of the fight song at that point.
I remember Rick Kaczynski stopped talking when Nebraska won up there that year, where Amir dove in for the touchdown, and he basically like let the entire band go through. So he was just kind of awkwardly standing there for like 4 minutes.
Yeah,
but he liked it. He's like, "Yeah, I love that.
This is college football, man." Basically. That was a game. Bruntz and I, we weren't coworkers yet, but I believe you ran around the stadium with me, right?
Well, you can't. They don't let you on the field at Michigan, so we ran around the entire big house to try to get to the tunnel.
Yeah, to the post game.
All right.
Anyway, that's enough of that.
That leads to a natural question, because you guys have been to BC. You've been to every stadium now, right, in the conference?
I think so. I'll think about it while you ask.
Does is like Michigan, does the big house rank pretty highly for you?
Yeah, it's cool. I think the Horseshoe.
I knew it didn't for Bruntz, so I wanted to start there.
I think the Horseshoe is the best stadium in the Big Ten, Ohio State. And when you remember the year Nebraska went there, what would it have been 2012, and they lost 63-38 at night, and Nebraska actually led early on, and then Martinez threw a pick or something. I remember outside of the stadium at like 4:30, looking at that place, and the lights were coming on, and you could just feel the buzz in the air. And I was said to, it was Sipple who was next to me. I was like, there ain't no way these boys are coming out of here with the wind tonight. Like, you could just tell, like, this is a place that's hard to play when people are revved up. So I would say the Horseshoe is my favorite. I think Michigan's a tamer crowd, and I don't mean that in disrespect, but I don't think it's the most hostile environment because it's all spread out so much. Like, it's not even that high off the ground, honestly. When you're next to it, it's not like the most intimidating place, but it is cool. Like when there's a gray sky and it's and you're there and you're like, that's the big house.
Bruntz, your take on the big house?
Yeah, it's a fine stadium. It's a place you should go if you're a college football fan. I guess I'm always just a little taken aback by how quiet it is for that many people. And BC hit on it with the way the stadium's laid out. It's pretty wide, a little deep. I don't know. It's you got the banner and everybody's running out. I would say it's in the top quarter of stadiums in the Big Ten is where I would put it.
Is it better than Memorial Stadium? When Nebraska played in big games with big atmospheres.
I would say that Memorial Stadium. Well, it's hard though because I don't know that Nebraska's really ever played in like a huge game there. Like the one in what was it, 14, 13, and 13. Like it was a good atmosphere, but I guess I was just a little bit surprised at how quiet it was all.
About that 2012 Ohio State game, I'm fairly certain they just ran the same play with Carlos Hyde for about 3 quarters, and Bo Pelini and Nebraska's defense never quite figured that one out.
Nebraska dominated like the
first quarter.
I mean, dominated. And they were shutting them down. And then Braxton Miller had that run where he juked somebody out of his jock, and it was over from there.
There's two games in the last decade that stand out to me for like how quickly they flipped. It was that one is one, and the other one is the Wisconsin game when Nebraska was leading by 10, and then the bottom fell out.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about another game that flipped, but much, much, much slower in its flip? And, similar to those, I think sitting there in the press box on Saturday, it felt like it was flipping even in the second quarter. I mean, when you're sitting there and the three of us are sitting up there and we're sort of murmuring to each other, it's going to be really important for Nebraska to just get out of here up 10-0. It sort of tells you the confidence that you have in that team, that they have the ability to just put someone away. Which is
there was like 12 minutes left in the second quarter, and I leaned over and said, "They just got to get this into the locker room." Like that was where I was at that point.
I think the audible noise that I made when Chubba Purdy kept sort of like back shuffling to the sideline before spiking that ball in front of Terrell Smith or whoever it was for Minnesota on their last play of the first half. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
yeah,
they had the whole bizarre, whatever the hell it was that they were doing on the previous 2 plays. Then they take the timeout, and then they call the pass play. And I thought he was for sure throwing that interception right there. So that's a good way to just dive into this Nebraska-Minnesota game that featured a 10-point lead from the Huskers, 2 good drives to start, and then nothing again until the very end of the game. Where do we want to go with this, Brian? Where do we want to start?
I mean, I guess you can start with the quarterbacks. I thought they should have played Smothers earlier. Mickey said it after the game. I felt like the defense had a good grip through the entire first half. So I still thought they might win the game at halftime because of the defense. But about midway through the second quarter, after Nebraska had done a few series off script, it was clear to me that Purdy's still not seeing it, as Mickey Joseph would put it. And I don't know that Logan Smothers is like, I'm not acting like they just go up and down the field with Logan Smothers. I don't know how that would have gone. I just think you kind of owed it to the squad to make that move. And especially after he came in midway through the third quarter and they ran the ball twice, and I thought it was effective enough. They got themselves into a 3rd and 3, and he puts the ball on a short pass to Oliver Martin, and he dropped it. Smothers didn't do anything wrong on that series. It was a good series. They were going to move the sticks. Your guy should make a simple catch. And then they went to Purdy for 2 more series, and that was a critical portion of that game. So I think it's not second guessing. You guys can back me up, and I could back you guys up on this. We were first guessing like how long Purdy should be out there up in the press box.
Well, we were talking about this last week during the podcast about whether, like, who do you want to play in this Minnesota game? And I guess the baffling thing to me is you watch Chubba Purdy struggle throughout the whole second half against Illinois, and you watched him struggle after the 3rd possession against Minnesota, and you saw all the same problems. Like, it doesn't matter that he was hurt or that he had more practice. He simply isn't comfortable. Like, he doesn't have drops. He just sort of like has a magnet that's pulling him to the sideline on those passing plays. Like, it just, and then Nebraska didn't help themselves. I mean, you had a couple drops, and I don't know how catchable the Travis Vokalek one was, but it felt like he had an opportunity there for at least a field flipping play. But I just don't know when you immediately start seeing your offense having to go 3 and out like 2 times in a row, how does your mind not immediately go back to that Illinois game and think, here we go again?
My thing is, and I think Mickey was asked this after the game on Saturday, but the thing that we've heard is for the last 2 games they went with Chubba because they felt like they were going to need to throw the ball. And I guess I'm at the point now where I'm not, and we're not able to see practice during the week, but I don't see there being a throw or something on the field that Chubba Purdy is doing right now that Logan Smothers couldn't do. And I think that's where, Mickey said after the game that he was on the same page with Mark Whipple about what they wanted to do at quarterback. I don't know. I don't know if he's saying that to kind of save face a little bit and take one on the chin for the offensive coordinator. But I just don't. I guess I don't know, having seen it for 6 quarters, what Chubba Purdy brings to the table that Logan Smothers can't. And I don't know if that's Nebraska's unwillingness or inability to game plan something that more fits what Smothers does, because I think they're 2 different quarterbacks, and I think they're 2 different styles of quarterbacks. However, I just think that what Logan Smothers can do with his feet as kind of the making something out of nothing, and also with what limited quarterback design run they can do, I think he just brings so much more to that. Oh, and by the way, he can, put the ball where it needs to be down. I mean, he's not going to bomb it 50 yards downfield with accuracy like Casey Thompson does, but he had some pretty good throws in those last 2 possessions. And I guess that's just kind of where I'm at with it now is, what is out there, waving my arms about what's out there that's not, that is causing these decisions to be made that are being made, because it's what we're seeing on Saturday is not following the explanation we're being given.
So now moving forward, we're, it's Tuesday morning. This is before the Mickey Joseph press conference. Is the expectation then that Logan Smothers is going to get the ball against Michigan? Because they put themselves in a really bad spot here for a variety of reasons. I mean, one, you have to win this game if you're going to try to go to a bowl game. So you have to give yourself the best opportunity to win. But 2, it also kind of looks bad if, like, okay, now Logan Smothers gets to start. Oh, by the way, this is the best team on our schedule in an environment that's going to be difficult against a defense that has the ability to really punish a guy if a quarterback's out there running. Like, it's just, I don't know. The optics of any decision you make here are going to look real bad.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really tricky for any of the quarterbacks, but I think you got to make that move at this point, because it just looks like it's sort of like, let's use a Major League Baseball analogy. Like if you bring a guy up, too soon and he's just not ready for it. And I right now, off the data we've seen from Purdy, I just sort of feel that way. And I don't like to say that, but with Smothers, you'd have to say when he's been put in games, he's kind of been a gamer. And Mickey did have a line where he said he's got to show it to us a little more in practice. He did slip a line in there, and I believe that. Like, I don't think guys just, there's probably something that's missing. And I will say this, a week ago, Alante Brown was asked about the quarterbacks, and Alante is a pretty straightforward guy, as you know. And he said Purdy's got a stronger arm, and he kind of did talk about there being a little difference there, very subtly, but he did. And so there is something those guys see, even players see it a little bit. But let's go back to Smothers. He comes in the Michigan State game last year when Adrian has a jaw thing, has a series where he goes 40 yards, and if he doesn't have a false start penalty on his O-line, he's moving the ball in his first big drive. Iowa game for 3 quarters, did exactly what he was asked to do pretty well to put them in position to win the game. This year, you'd have to say when he's been out there, he's done the same thing. So, I mean, just off of data, Logan doesn't seem like he's quaking in his cleats when he's out there, at least. And you got to that's the guy I think you got to turn to in an environment like this. And it's probably going to be pretty difficult, though, and it's going to look kind of ugly. And then everybody's going to say, well, it didn't matter, who played quarterback. But it maybe did against Minnesota. It very much might have mattered.
Have you used the line quaking in his cleats before, or did you just come up with that right now?
I think I've said it before, so it wasn't like, yeah.
It's a good line.
Quit, yeah. All right. I'll store it in the. I'll store it away.
I'd never heard it before. I thought it was pretty good. Even Bruntz kind of like did a little perk up on it.
I'll put it in my little pill box and keep it. There's stuff though that then I end up using like 10 times, and then I'm like, all right, I've hit my quota on this. I can't write that line anymore.
It happens. We all have clutches or crutches, whatever they are. Bruntz, what can Nebraska get out of this Michigan game? Like, I mean, obviously, like I don't know how else to preview this game. It sucks.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to belabor a point that everybody knows, but it's November 8th and the season feels like it's gone to shit. Like, this sucks. They're going to go to, yeah, I mean, apologies if your kids are listening, but they probably watched the same thing you did and they learned 4-letter words. This, like, what are you supposed to do with this? Like, this is Ohio State coming to Lincoln all over again. It's these games. Nebraska keeps putting themselves in these situations.
Point spread wise, it's Penn State 2017. It was the same spread.
So we can sit here and talk about scrolling well.
That was a 12-point game.
That was a 12-point game that was tight late.
For the 50th damn time since 2017, we could talk about scrolls. I don't know. I mean, you guys are going to go cover this game. Nebraska's going to be lucky if they stay within 2 touchdowns. And it's November 8th. They don't have a head coach. They don't have a quarterback. Like, there's just nothing about this that's remotely appealing. So on my sheet here, I have, what can Nebraska get out of this game against Michigan? And it's not like supposed to be a joke, and I've sort of turned it into that. But that's where we are. Like, this is just awful. I mean, everyone knows it. Sometimes I just feel like I need to say it out loud. This sucks.
Brian and I both got the email yesterday from Southwest Airlines, and the subject was, what was it? Your trip to Detroit is coming up soon, or something.
Exclamation point.
Exclamation point. The exclamation point was doing a lot of work there. I don't know. I mean, this is kind of this is a tough game. I'll put it that way. And I in the back of my mind the other day when that point spread came out was thinking, like, is this a Nebraska USC Callahan era game plan where you just try to get in there and get out as quickly as you possibly can? Like, I mean, is that kind of where we are? With the quarterback questions, certainly that doesn't help. And it's interesting, I've seen some conversation out there, and Brian and I were talking about this off air, but when Nebraska went up there in 2018, everybody's saying, oh, Michigan didn't call off the dogs. I mean, they kind of did. Like, they could have named their total that game. And, I go back to Scott Frost saying that was rock bottom. I mean, it feels like we're still there, heading back up to Michigan again. So I don't know. I mean, you play hard. Maybe the defense, can bow up and give you a little bit of a chance against Michigan's running game. But I just don't like Nebraska's offense's chances against this Michigan defense. I'll put it that way. So to answer your question, I don't know.
The score of that game, by the way, 4 years ago, was 39-0 at halftime. So, yeah, he did call off the dogs. It was 56-10. That could have been way worse. Harbaugh around here has this rap with some people that he runs it up. I'll defend him. I mean, they run the ball. They run the ball with some authority, and that puts you in a bad spot if you can't stop it and you're just outmanned, because it's like the old Nebraska days. It's like, well, what do you want me to do? We're going to hand it off to our running back, and he's going to go for 12 yards. That's your fault. So if that's running up the score, so be it. But that's why this game is scary, because even if they try it, even if it gets out of hand and they're just trying to run it, like, can Nebraska hang in there at the, without it getting ugly? And I do think it's a game where, and I don't know that they have it in them from what we've seen with Whipple, but you got to milk that play clock down. You got to try to get yourself into 3rd and 4s, 3rd and 3 type plays. And you got to have little plays where you feel like good about those situations, and you get 5 yards and you get another 2 minutes off the clock. There's nothing wrong with that as a strategy. And I would actually defend the old Bill Callahan strategy in the USC game. He actually had Nebraska within 21-10 early in the 4th quarter against a way better team. So I don't know that it was like the stupidest thing ever that we always act like it was. So I do think you got to have sort of that mindset going into this game.
Has anyone looked better in retrospect than Bill Callahan, given Nebraska's 15 years since his exit?
You don't hear people badmouth him quite as much. They might still badmouth the Rock over there, but is the Rock still over there, Bruntz?
It's still there.
Bruntz actually put a tracker on it a couple years ago. He just wanted to know where it was at all.
You gotta look a little bit harder than you used to find it. But I'll go over there this week and see if it's still there. It used to be, they moved it again with the construction, so maybe it finally met its maker. But I think it's still over there. Let's check.
All right, let's move on from the Rock.
All right,
let's move on from Nebraska, Michigan, because I don't have anything I can add after my diatribe. Let's just move on, shall we? Coaches, Nebraska needs to hire one. We had a day on Thursday last week where we were all busy. We're all making phone calls. We're all trying to figure out what's going on. So it feels like, the calendar hit November and there's finally a little bit more activity, a little bit more interest. Football Scoop put out there that same day in what I thought was kind of an interesting article for a variety of reasons. Name checked a lot of the names that we've discussed. And so what I want to do is I want to throw some names at each of you, and I just want your honest assessment of that coach as you see them, and if you think it could work for Nebraska. And then, I didn't give you any heads up as to who you're going to get, so feel free to go as long or as short on it as you want. Is that okay? Is this fair? Did I blindside you too much?
No, I'm good.
I've thought about all of them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then we're going to start. We're going to, with that sort of bravado, I guess we have to start with BC. And the name on everyone's lips Thursday afternoon was Matt Rule. Matt Rule obviously was at Temple for a couple years and Baylor, then ended up in the NFL with the Carolina Panthers and was fired earlier this year. Every indication is he's going to get back into coaching. There seems to be a belief, and I made some phone calls. I'll just put this out there on Thursday. There seems to be a belief he'll be a head coach as early as next year. And so there's legitimate interest from Matt Rule in terms of coaching again. And from the conversations I had, Nebraska seems like the kind of place that he would have interest in. What do you think of Matt Rule, Brian Christopherson?
He's one of my favorite potential hires. I like that he's built at different levels. I know there are criticisms that you could be made about his building jobs, or I should say people who would take away from them a little bit. Like, for instance, what he did at Baylor to me is very impressive. What was it by year 2 where they were up in double digits in wins? There are some people who would say, well, and I get it, Baylor's got a ton of resources. They had the whole Art Briles fiasco, but you knew that coaches around the country might say that was a job that was going to wake up quickly again. It just took, a little elbow grease. Nonetheless, he did it, and he did it well. I'm not worried that he's jumped around a little bit. Some people get caught up in that. Like, he was at Temple maybe for a shorter time, but he left Temple to take a better job like anybody else would in any other profession. So why do we always get all up in arms about that? And then he left Baylor for his crack at the NFL, which guys do. And I think what happened was, I don't really care what happened in the NFL that much. I don't. I think there's certain guys who aren't made for that league necessarily, or their mind doesn't just the way they operate doesn't quite fit with those type of grown men, guys who are getting, who are professionals. But I think he's meant to be a college coach. I think he's going to be a very good college coach somewhere. I think he's an innovative recruiter who has clever ideas. We have articles on 24/7 Sports that dive deep into sort of his philosophy on recruiting, and I think it's impressive. Would he want to try to recruit to Nebraska as opposed to a more fertile recruiting ground area? That's the question. But as you said, Schaefer, and I know Bruntz knows this too from phone calls, I don't think his name is just floating in the air for no reason. I don't. I think he's at least somebody you got to keep in mind.
All right, moving on here. Bruntz, I would like you to discuss Gary Patterson, whose name also was in the Football Scoop article on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, it's an interesting name. I mean, I think I'm of two minds about Gary Patterson. I mean, obviously he had a pretty good run of success at TCU. Things didn't necessarily end there as well as he probably would have liked. TCU obviously is kind of getting it done this year with a lot of players that he had recruited. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's his candidacy, I think, kind of depends on how you view this job. I mean, if you're looking for somebody that's going to be at Nebraska for 15 years, I mean, it's not him. But, I think he has at least a little bit of a pedigree that and a name that would get some attention. And, I do know from, earlier in the summer that people were kind of saying that he was wanting to get back into the head coaching ranks and kind of take another stab at a Power 5 job. And he's a grinder. I think he's, built something at TCU that would certainly get Trev's attention. Would he be at the front of my list? Probably not. But I think that, at least the success that he had at TCU is a pretty good track record. And if you did kind of the blind resume thing, I think he would stack up pretty favorably to a lot of people that you would put him up against. But I don't know. I mean, I think in my mind, I'd probably look elsewhere first. But I think he would be. He's an interesting name that's kind of been in the back of my head since the summer as somebody that maybe not everybody's thinking about, and certainly because he's not a sitting Power 5 head coach right now, but he does have a track record of success.
I got a quick question. I'll ask it to Schaefer. It's kind of an uncomfortable question because I think people don't like to go there, but everybody always brings up like, oh, he's too old or this or that. Came up a little bit with Riley. Patterson's 62. I think like Lance Leipold's 58. Mickey Joseph's 54. Does that matter to you? Do you think that should matter in this decision? If a guy is over 60 or something like that, and we're talking not that he couldn't get it done for a few years, but maybe it's a limited amount of time he wants to coach. And then again, he could coach for a dozen years, like some of the guys who are now in their 70s.
It doesn't matter to me. And the reason it doesn't, and this is just kind of my thought process on it, is that whoever it is, whether they're a young guy, an old guy, whoever, there's a good chance you're looking at a 5-year window in which they have to kind of pull this thing out of the muck where it is right now, build a foundation, and have it heading in the right direction. And so if that's, like we're using Gary Patterson as an example, if that's who Nebraska ends up with, and he's got a second wind and he's able to kind of reset where Nebraska finds itself, and in 5 years you have to hire another coach, and maybe you have somebody on the staff ready to take the reins and you can keep everything rolling at that point, or you've made Nebraska more desirable because in that run he's proven the ability to win, and that Nebraska isn't stuck in this pattern of having 3 to 5 wins for eternity. So I sort of always view every coach, regardless of age, in a 5-year window of they have sort of 3 to 5 years to prove that not only are they the right person for this job, but that they can sort of reset the Nebraska foundation. If they do that, anything after is kind of, can they build on it, or are they getting out of the way for the next person? I mean, if you have a 62-year-old coach that comes in and he gives you 5 great years, and after, year 2, you're bowling, year 3, you're knocking off ranked teams, year 4, you're in ranked throughout the season. I mean, you can't be upset with that because of sort of where Nebraska's at. I mean, ideally, would you hire the right 46-year-old that can coach here for 20 years and set Nebraska up perfectly? Great. That's just not what college football is anymore. I mean, there's just I don't even know. I mean, you look across the landscape, was there a coach hired in like 2006 that's still rolling along right now? I mean, Bruntz is making a face.
I can think of one. He was hired early. He was hired earlier than that.
Saban?
Nope. Closer.
I mean, like not Ferentz, but yeah, no, I mean, I understand. He's been there forever. That also has its own sort of cantankerous end to it as well. But this idea that you're going to go hire somebody who's in his mid-40s, that'll be sort of the face of your program for multiple decades, feels fanciful to me. So I don't know that I care. Yeah. You look at what North Carolina is getting under Mac Brown right now. They're in a better spot than they were previous under Bruntz's favorite hat-wearing coach, Larry Fedora. So, I mean, you got to do the right thing for you, but I take far more of a short-term look at it than I do long-term. So age isn't a huge deal to me. The bigger thing is, does that person relate to somebody who's 20 years old? Can they relate to a 17-year-old when they're sitting in a living room? Can Gary Patterson do that? That's a real question I have based off conversations I had. And I put that on the message board a couple times, so I don't need to rehash it. But that would be more interesting to me than the actual straight age of somebody.
Right. That's a good answer.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Maybe we'll cut it out. We'll make a social media clip of it.
Yeah.
We can do something like that and prove that, we can learn new tricks too. All right. I have a couple more coaches I want to get to. Bruntz, we'll stick with you. Chris Kleiman. His name comes up. Kansas State has done really well. We talked a lot about Lance Leipold. I mean, and Lance Leipold in Kansas, they're going to a bowl. I'm sure people have seen the stat. Nebraska is the only Power 5 team since 2017 to not go to a bowl game, yada, yada, yada. We've talked a lot about Lance Leipold. We haven't talked as much about Chris Kleiman. Would that be someone that would interest you? And would that be a realistic hire for Trev Alberts?
It would interest me. I don't know how realistic it is. I mean, I feel like he's a name that was kind of in that initial group of the Leipold, Campbell, Kleiman, that foursome, and you just don't hear it as much. And I kind of wonder too, the more that K-State, kind of keeps grinding away, if he would be willing to leave. I mean, I feel like, he made the move to K-State. You kind of got that thing humming a little bit. He's got an AD that he feels good about. I know that there are connections there with Trev Alberts, certainly, with them both being from that part of Iowa. But I think it would be a good hire. I think he's a great coach. I think that the style of football that he plays would translate very well to the Big Ten. I just don't know that I would put him towards the front of the line of guys that would really be looking to leave, even if you are talking about, doubling salary or whatever. I just don't, the longer this thing's gone along, the less I feel more confident that, that he or a Matt Campbell are options right now, or good options right now, or actionable options right now for Nebraska.
If you see a name that's come up, and it comes up from different parts of the college football world. It comes up from people yearning for Nebraska to return to what it looked like in 1995. And I don't mean necessarily the wins, but the aesthetics of how that offense was ran. And that's Jeff Monken. His name pops up from the Football Scoop Report. It's popped up elsewhere. Does Jeff Monken appeal to you at any level? And can he take what he's done at Army, which is impressive, but has its own sort of connotations to it? Can he take that and can he have success at a Power 5 job? Or did Paul Johnson kind of ruin that with Service Academy to a Power 5 level?
I think it would get a lukewarm reaction from the fan base, but I do think it doesn't mean it would fail. And you got to go back to what Trev said on the opening press conference. And I bet he had a few guys in mind, and Monken might have been one of them that very day, because I think that he had thought about, there seems to be a background there where he knows Monken's work well and respects it. And I think a lot of people in the coaching community do too. So, remember he said, we don't have to win the press conference with this hire, and we're not going to get all caught up in that. Well, Jeff Monken would be like exhibit A of like, here's your next football coach. And people are like, okay, that's how that would go. I got his Army. I mean, I do remember he's been in Army since 2014. And I think nowadays, 50 or 60 years ago, guys used to make that jump all the time from like service academies to bigger programs. But now you don't see it. We just don't know how it worked. Like we haven't seen like examples like, can that actually happen? Where a guy goes from that sort of level of football and sort of a different environment to like what it would be like at Nebraska in a Power 5 program. But when he took over Army, I will say for Monken, I mean, they stunk. People might remember, like in 2014, Navy was like the big dog who kind of owned them whenever that game would pop up. And he started 4-8, 2-10, but then he went 8-5 by year 3, 10-3, 11-2. He did have a 5-8, but back to 9-3, 9-4. So he did a really good job building them up. He's gone toe to toe in some games. Like I remember they took Oklahoma to the wire and just owned the line of scrimmage and had the ball for like 44 minutes or something. It was ridiculous. A couple of years ago, almost beat Lincoln Riley. So I don't think it's stupid. Like I don't, but I just know, and I know that if he's announced, there's going to be a lot of people kind of, okay, this is not going to work. But the good thing is they play the games and we find out.
That is true. I don't know if it's a good thing around here.
Or the bad thing is that they play the games and we find out.
That might be a more accurate summation. Is there any coach that I didn't bring up there that you guys want to talk about here right now?
Mickey.
You want to talk about Mickey? Okay, so I've gotten this question a lot from people. Does the last 2 weeks and kind of how the quarterback play has been handled, has that soured you at all with Mickey Joseph? Or do you approach it with the idea not necessarily his players, not his coaching staff, hard to fault him too much for these things?
It's a tough spot that he's been in the last couple of weeks, because I think when you look, or when you really listen to what he's saying and when you really listen to what Mark Whipple is saying, I don't know how much the two of them are actually on the same page about things. I think if Mickey was just being completely honest, I don't think that this is the offense that he would be running as a head coach. And I think the problem is that there's not really on this staff right now an option that he could go to and say, okay, you're the guy that's handling the offense, you're calling plays. Mickey doesn't have the background of calling plays. And I think that that's really kind of put him in a tough spot, because in some ways it looks like, a failure of leadership, but I think it's also kind of a reflection of the options that he's been given right now. I think some of the in-game stuff has been a little bit shaky the last couple of weeks. I think you're starting to see the results of the lack of development and retention on the roster and lack of depth in certain spots as the season's gone along. So to answer your question, I think there's some things that have popped up the last couple of weeks that give me pause. I think there's also a bit of a curve that you probably have to grade him on based on what he inherited and who he inherited. And I think for people watching what's going on the field, I think it's a matter of kind of how sharply that curve is that you want to use. So from Trev's point of view, I think you basically need to decide, like, are you seeing enough kind of behind the scenes and everything that leads you to believe that a Mickey Joseph staff, whoever that would be significantly improved from what Nebraska's got right now? Because that, to me, like, if let's say this week we hear that Mickey Joseph's the guy, and my immediate reaction is going to be like, okay, what's the staff going to look like? Because that to me is the big question mark, is what kind of web can he put out and find with assistance, and what's that going to look like? Because I do think that's the biggest question in my mind, in addition to just kind of things that have popped up the last couple of weeks and kind of the way things are being run. Because I think it's, the honeymoon period and the wins over Indiana and Rutgers have definitely worn off at this point.
You got thoughts, Pete?
Oh, Bruntz said it pretty well. I mean, I think whenever you're analyzing a guy, as much as everybody likes Mickey, you'd have to be fair about it and say, yeah, they should have played some others quicker, I think, and say, well, that was a minus there on a decision maybe. And he kind of acknowledged it in the post game. On the other hand, if you step away from the Minnesota game, and PJ Fleck is the type of guy who is going to blow sunshine on the other guy. He's that type of guy, and that's not even a bad quality, but he's going to praise the other coach. But Fleck, I think after that game, genuinely probably had to give Joseph's staff some credit for that first half, in the fact that Minnesota was a pretty significant favorite, a 2-touchdown or more favorite. And I think if Fleck and his staff's looking at the film on Nebraska going into that game, they're probably pretty confident they're going to get a lot done and run the ball on them and stuff like that. And Nebraska had a solid plan for the material they had on the field to put themselves in position to win the game. So I bet, honest to goodness, Fleck would say Mickey and his staff did a pretty good job, with what they had, manufacturing that game to be in position to have a shot to win it. Whereas like a year or so ago, like when Nebraska lost its opener at Illinois, for instance, I think there's a lot of coaches around the Big Ten and country are looking at Scott Frost and saying that's a guy who's doing little with more. Like he's not getting, like he just got out coached by Belima and that stuff. That said, Frost was in a lot of close games last year and didn't win. And we got to get away from around here acting like, well, the guys really played hard and they were in position to win the game Saturday.
Seize the opportunity.
This is Nebraska. You were up 10-0. You had that game in your grips. Your defense is playing downhill, and you let it get away. So, I mean, I go both ways on it, but I think Trev Alberts, you guys, I don't know if you would probably feel the same way maybe. I just don't think he's a guy who's a knee-jerk guy. I think it's all about, like, what's your broad plan? Who's the network of guys you have to bring in? What's your recruiting strategy? How are you going to change this roster so that, the talent is just different in a year or two? What's your answers there? And those are the key questions I think that have to be answered that we obviously aren't privy to.
Let's dive over to basketball here and finish things out there. Nebraska played their first game. They are 1-0 for the first time since 2020. Is that right? No, they didn't. Did they start 1-0 in 2020?
Bruntz. I don't remember. I don't know. They lost last year to Western Illinois.
Right, and they lost the first year to
Riverside.
Yeah.
So they might have started one of those years. They started 1-0, but yeah. So that's good.
So 1-0 against Maine. In my news section in PBA while holding a beer, I don't know. I don't think they're going to be good. I don't know what they're exactly going to be, but they seem to look different from a physical standpoint than a lot of the teams I think we've watched under Hoiberg. And what I kind of mean by that is you have a guard or a point forward in Sam Griesel that he was able to kind of get into the paint. Like he got a matchup that he liked. He was able to back somebody down and go get an easy basket that way. Like they have more physical guards. They also did things that, I sent a text in our group chat about how Joanne Gary and Bandamel do things that I hadn't seen in a while. And Bruntz had a joke that I'll leave out, but they rebound, they box out. They have like a higher basketball IQ on this team than I think I've seen with Nebraska for the last couple of years. I don't know that it's going to translate into a bunch of wins, but I sort of appreciate that they do some small like aspects of the game much better than we've seen. There's still issues. They still don't make free throws. They're still going to have long scoring drought stretches. I don't know how good the defense is going to be, but I came away at least pleasantly surprised by a few aspects of this team. And it was the first time I had put eyes on them, this year. I'd skipped the exhibition, I skipped their opening night. So I don't know, maybe I'm drinking too much Kool-Aid with like a double-digit win over Maine.
2020, they beat McNeese State out of the gates.
Amir Abdullah had a big play in that one.
That sounds right.
Yeah, that's how I remember it.
Saved it for him.
I thought, the big three transfers sort of all excelled at what they were supposed to excel at in the first game. Emmanuel Bandumel is supposed to be that guy who sort of does the dirty stuff a little bit, kind of makes that play. It got to be a 54-53 game, and he raced back and he blocked a shot against the backboard, and then he scored on the next possession, and it kind of let Nebraska breathe again. And I thought Sam Cassell had 22 points, 18 of them in the second half, 8 of 12 shooting. And I think he's one of those guys who you look up and you're like, oh man, he's got 18 points right now. That sort of thing. Like, he just did it, let the game come to him. And Jawan Gary, will he be able to do this against Big Ten teams? I don't know, where you miss your shot, you go get it. But I like his tenacity, getting 8 offensive rebounds. And there was a stretch where his attacking the glass and getting putbacks sort of kept Nebraska at arm's reach from Maine. And I don't know how much of it you want to put on Nebraska's defense. Maine had a couple guys who just lit it up. I mean, they got hot, and they had probably a few looks that were too open, but they had 2 or 3 shots where I'd say I can't even pronounce his name, but number 22, who was 6 of 7 on 3-pointers, he hit some hard shots there in a stretch where he was kind of on fire, and you kind of just tip your cap. So they were able, though, to score after each of those possessions and sort of answer with a 2 on the other end. And that's what I liked, is that they didn't go on like that 6-minute drought and let a bad situation turn into a disaster. They sort of weathered the storm, and it didn't look like a fire drill out there. It looked calm and competent.
They got UNO on Thursday, right? Like that's their next game. That the Mavs played well against Kansas in the opener, so I think that'll be a kind of an interesting game on Thursday. I expect kind of a good crowd as well.
The thing I like about this team, and you guys kind of touched on it, but with Griesel and Bandumel, there just seems to be guys in places where there's not going to be kind of the panic in the immediate, like, we're going to immediately shift to hero ball or get away from what we are just based on bad things happening on the floor. We'll see if that happens, but that's my sense, is that Fred Hoiberg probably has a better idea of what's happening on the floor or will happen on the floor than he did last year, where it was just like the second, they fell behind or shots weren't falling, it was like, we're going to do whatever we're going to do. Guys are going to be hoisting up bad shots. Guys are going to be going to the rim with their heads down and throwing up bad shots and not playing defense. So will that result in wins? I don't know, but it will at least keep games from getting really out of hand like they have in the past. So I don't know. I mean, is that a higher floor? Like, what? I don't know what the best comparison is there, but
yeah, it's hard to know how it's going to transfer right now. It really is, but you can only go off of what's in front of you. And I saw last night a game where last year's team could have got themselves in a real problem, and this team ended up, winning by 13, and someone would say, well, that's not that impressive. They're 20.5-point favorites. If a guy doesn't go 6 for 7 on you from 3, you probably win by 20 or so. So, I mean, it was, it wasn't like it was uncomfortable where I just thought Nebraska was in danger of losing the game. So they responded well. Casey Tamanaga, after the game, I thought had the quote of the press conference. And, I mean, you got to set it up that Casey is, it's not his first language. So in those press conference settings, it's a little difficult, but yet he said a lot in a little when he said, yeah, last year's team was very individual. He just said it was an individual team and this team plays together and that's the difference. And that was basically what he said. And I just thought that was really interesting that a guy who's not going to use many words up there, honestly, he chose to use those words to describe the difference. And it was pretty telling.
Did he drop a "we" over me like it was the back of a state basketball shirt?
He could have. Yeah, it's we versus me t-shirt season. As hoops gets going.
All right. Anything we need to get to here before we close this out?
Yeah, I had a question doubling back to how we started. You tweeted a picture of yourself holding a beer.
Sure did.
What size of a beer was that? I know generally what your hand size is because we've measured them every year around NFL Combine time, but that felt like that cup seemed a little small.
Yeah, it's allegedly a 16-ounce cup. They have 16 and 24-ounce. I will say this: if you're going to a game and you're going to get yourself a beverage or a hot dog or whatever, plan to stand in line for longer than you want, because I went after the stoppage for the under 8 and we made it back right before the start of the second half. So Pinnacle Bank Arena, get your crap together. There's going to be a lot more people than there was on opening night. And they want to be served in a more timely fashion. That being said, it was a 16-ounce beer. They didn't top it off very well. That's another complaint that I would have. But you know what? I got to drink a beer while watching Nebraska play basketball. It was an enjoyable experience. No one was the worse for it, and this could have been happening 8 years ago. Those are my thoughts.
Here's what you need to do next game. If you go Thursday, take like a measuring cup, okay. and I want you to get a beer, and I want you to.
Should I get like a ruler so we can know and we can look at the?
That seemed like it was like a 12-ounce cup. That was like a tall at Starbucks. Like you weren't getting a venti beer there.
It was opening night for Nebraska basketball's team on the floor, and they had to get their chemistry down and everything. It was also opening night for the concession workers, and they probably had to learn, where stuff was and how the electronic, system works and which is the 16-ounce cup and which is the 24. I don't know why they'd have a 12-ounce cup. You can't buy a 12-ounce. Maybe they're nickeling and diming us. Maybe this is an investigative report that we can look into.
It feels like there might be a little 3-card Monty going on with the beer cup sizes. Yeah. Like I think that deserves some closer inspection.
That cup would have felt plenty big to Jared Goff. So
that was the joke that was used. Yes. Yeah. Jared Goff and his doll hands. Is that right, Bruntz?
Yeah, that's correct. I think what we did learn last night is you could probably play quarterback in a cold weather franchise. So you got that going for you.
No doubt about it. All right. I don't have anything else to add unless we want to continue to talk about beer in the arena and hand size. Otherwise, we'll save that for March, where it's fitting in both descriptions. So, everyone, be sure to check out Husker247. Like I said earlier, we'll have both Bruntz and BC on hand in Ann Arbor. They're probably going to go to that deli that Bruntz loves.
Yeah,
that's
great.
the one thing they have planned, they're going to the deli. Are you going to go to the Pistons game?
No, 3 p.m. kick there. So no house that Lamb beer built for us.
Neither of you can name a current Piston, right? I can't name a Piston.
Darko, isn't he a Piston?
He's not there anymore.
Jerry Stackhouse, Ben Wallace. How's that?
Nope.
We actually did this.
They were Pistons.
We looked this up on the way to Purdue, and I still can't remember who was on the list. Like we had the Pistons roster out, and we were going through it. Like
they signed somebody to a big deal. You sent me the link, and I didn't know who it was.
It wasn't Joe Dumars. I know that.
Yeah.
Great. The first and only Joe Dumars reference on this podcast history. All right. Be sure to check out Husker247.com. Plenty of coverage from the game coming up. Plenty of coverage of the coaching search. Keeping an eye on everything. Who knows? There could be an announcement at any time, or it could be at the end of the season, or it could be when you least expect it. Or maybe they just never announce a coach and then the interim tag just goes away and Mickey's the head coach. I don't know how it's going to happen. If I did.
And Trev doesn't even address it. That'd be kind of funny. Just kind of like let it keep going.
We're all just kind of like sitting there at the opening spring press conference. And Mickey walks in. He's like, I guess I'm still here.
Yeah.
So who knows how it's going to go. But however it happens, we'll have the coverage for you at Husker247.com. Be sure to check that out. The Husker247 Hypecast. Even though I had a mini meltdown during this podcast, I will get you hyped for this Nebraska-Michigan game. Josh Peterson from 1620 The Zone will be joining us. That'll be on Thursday as well. So be sure to check that out. Check out all the coverage. Keep it locked on to Husker247.com.